Good evening, everyone. Tonight, our special guest on LFF Live is Martin Mawdsley from ACORN. ACORN is a renters union formed in Bristol in 2014 and now has over 30 branches across England and Wales. Some of ACORN's big successes have been helping to achieve a ban on extortionate letting fees in 2019, campaigning against council's use of bailiff firms, and securing 100 million in fire and safety improvements for council blocks in Bristol, amongst countless other successes. And ACORN is part of the Renters Reform Coalition, a group of leading housing organisations who've been helping to shape the Renters' Rights Act, which is obviously what we will be talking about today. Martin is the ACORN branch secretary in Liverpool, a position that he has held since 2022. He's been a member of ACORN since 2020, and he also served on the ACORN National Executive Committee from 2023 to 2025. Thanks so much for joining us today, Martin. It's great to have you. So today gives us the chance to discuss the implications of Labour's Renters' Rights Act, particularly as key elements, including the ban on no-fault evictions and the end of fixed-term contracts are set to come into force in just 30 days on the 1st of May. So if any of our listeners here today have any questions, please just feel free to put them in the chat and I will, I'll read them out. So the first question I have for you, Martin, ACORN's been campaigning for a Renters' Rights Act of some form since I think 2019 when Theresa May promised to end no-fault evictions. Obviously, it's been branded as a big leap forward for renters' rights. Do you think the Act will shift power back to renters?
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. The short answer, yes. It's a lot better than the version of the act that the Tory government were hoping to bring in a couple of years ago, actually, as well. But yeah, the short answer is it's a big step forward for renters. We're much more secure, much more able to stand up for ourselves as well when there are issues. We don't need to be in fear of retaliation. It could go a lot further. Of course, no single bit of legislation was going to fix everything all in one go, but generally we're pretty happy with how it's turned out. Yeah, I think it's a big step forward for renters.
In what areas do you think it could go further?
The big elephant in the room of it, of course, is affordability. It doesn't really address that at all. I mean, the tribunal system is being tightened up a bit, but that can only go so far and is probably going to be swamped, leaving people in a bit of a limbo. We would much rather an actual formal system of some sort of rent controls. We did try and get some sort of rent commission to investigate ways to make affordability part of the bill into the act, but we weren't able to do that. So yeah, that's still quite outstanding. Really, that's work for ACORN to be doing in the future now.
And obviously, rent controls are used in some sort of cities in Europe, Berlin. They're used in New York. Do they work? Do they work well?
I mean, the thing to remember when we say rent controls is that covers quite a wide range of policies. Not every place with rent controls has the exact same system of rent controls. There's lots of different ways of working out what rents can be, what the increases can be, what sort of properties qualify and are exempt, and things like that. For ACORN, we're currently still working on our exact position on that, and that'll be led by our policy team and our members. There's a big focus, I think, from our members that any sort of policy we end up advocating for should take into account our incomes so that it's going to always be fair and affordable. But yes, like broadly, we believe rent controls, when they're done properly, really work and really effective. The best example we can think of really is, in fact, Britain before the deregulation of the market under Thatcher. Back when we had rent controls, it actually coincided with the biggest period of house building the country's ever seen. So the argument that rent controls actually deflate housing supply and stop building actually is wrong. If you limit the amount of profit landlords and developers can make, the only way they can make money is by building more. So I don't think there's actually an issue there as long as the policy will be done properly.
Mm. That ties in nicely with house building, obviously, as another facet of improving affordability. The government has set a target to build 1.5 million new homes over this parliament and over the next 10 years, 300,000 new social and affordable homes. They also want to reinvigorate council house building. How important is it that the government increases the number of specifically of homes for social rent?
Yeah, massively important, massively important. We massively believe in social housing. I think 99% of our members would agree that we should have a lot more social housing again, proper social housing, not through housing associations and things like that, but directly council-owned operated properties. I think the policies that the government are talking about for that are really good. That's not the only answer, and that's going to take a lot of time to actually be brought to fruition. You can't just build houses overnight. So that's again really why things like the Renters' Rights Act is really important in the short term to make sure that private landlords that we're still going to be relying on for a good few years still have to play by the rules and can't just do things like Section 21s anymore, things like that, while we wait for more affordable council housing as well, and as well as how private developers can build houses themselves. We've spoken to the government as well about stopping them lowering the quality of houses as well. That's another thing that's really important. It's not just a question of build, 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 as Steve Reed, the housing minister, has put it. If we're building bad houses, if we're building where people actually need to be for jobs and there's no services, things like that, then that's not actually a solution either.
As you've said, the Rights Act is an important sort of short to medium term measure for regulating landlords. What do renters need to know about their rights before the 1st of May?
So the thing that's going to change a lot, obviously, apart from Section 21 being abolished, is contracts won't be on fixed terms anymore. You'll be living there for as long as you want until either you give your notice or a landlord has a valid, provable and court reason to evict you. There will be a protected period, but if you are already living in your property now, when the change happens, the change will be instant, but there will be changes to the protected period. So you'll need to check when your current contract started and work out whether your protected period will end too, for things like whether your landlord can take the property back to put it back on the market to sell or to move in, things like that, because it won't be the full year if you're already, like, say, for example, halfway through your contract, but it will be changing instantly. So 1st of May, you are completely protected from Section 21, no matter when you started, as well as other things you should know about. Yeah, it's always good to know what evictions can still take place and how long notice periods will be for things like that, and how you can challenge rent increases and so on. A lot of that is, things that we would encourage renters to do anyway, though. So again, it's always good to check with, if you're an ACORN member, ask your branch, or Shelter is another great resource for finding out what your rights are now and what's going to be changing.
Do you think there is a risk that a lot of renters don't know about the extra protections that the Renters' Rights Act gives them, and sort of that for example, advertising rental properties won't necessarily be properly regulated? It may say that it's a long-term rental still, but actually it has to be rolling.
Potentially, yes. We've even seen some of our members have been slightly confused about the change in contracts from 12 months to open-ended, and we've had to try and explain that means you're not locked in forever, that you are able to go after 2 months' notice, things like that. Yeah, I think dodgy adverts, things like that, are things that have always been going on, things we always try and look out for, and things that we're always trying to clamp down on. And that comes down to like the regulation, and I think maybe some of that we'll only really see exactly how that's going to play out once the act is implemented and we've been able to have a chance to see what sort of ways landlords are going to try and get around it, or estate agents are going to take advantage of it. Yeah, there's always a risk. It's constant battle trying to make sure people know what their rights are and how to challenge it if their rights have been infringed, if they suspect it. Again, like I said, if you ever feel like something isn't right, there are resources out there like Shelter, like ourselves, who can give you a bit of support with that.
And while the bill was being considered in Parliament, and since there has been, and probably, yeah, with lots of other discussions about rental properties, there's always this argument that greater regulation pushes landlords to sort of sell up and exit the market. There has been some of that going on. I think in 2025, 93,000 buy-to-let landlords sold up. What do you make of this argument in general? Do you think that yeah, the conversation, how do we combat these arguments in a progressive way?
There absolutely has been landlords leaving the market and quite a slightly higher rate than previously in the last couple of years since the Renters' Rights and Renters' Reform Bill before that. But there hasn't been this sort of mass exodus that had been threatened, and a lot of the landlords who are leaving are actually just retiring. They're landlords who bought through right to buy 30 or so years ago. They're now retiring. They don't want to bother managing anymore and they're cashing in. But the fact is, simply to put it as bluntly as I can, really, if you're the sort of landlord who doesn't want to be a landlord anymore because you can't just kick someone out on a whim, or you can't be bothered going through the proper processes, and just want to rely on Section 21 instead, and then good, like fine, leave. Someone else will take over the property who will manage it properly, or to buy it to live in themselves. There hasn't been a mass exodus. There aren't hundreds and thousands of tenants who are about to be made homeless because no one wants to be a landlord anymore. No one can still afford to buy that. That isn't happening at all. The landlords who are leaving, some will be doing it, but again, like, fine. Those houses won't go. They'll be sold to someone else who will take care of them better or live in them themselves, which is even better.
So that argument, yeah, shouldn't be relied on to sort of prevent changes from reforms from happening in the rental market.
Yeah, I mean, anytime there's any threat of reforms to renting, landlords always say, "Oh, we'll all sell out and then everyone will be homeless," and it just doesn't happen, and it hasn't happened now, and it won't happen next month.
Mm. Mhm. Thanks. Um, you spoke a little bit about the tribunal system briefly. Do you think the tribunal system will be a good way for tenants to challenge rent increases? Do you think there's a risk that they could become overwhelmed with more claims brought?
Well, crucially, one of the changes that the Renters' Rights Act is bringing in is that if you challenge a rent increase at a tribunal now, your rent will stay the same until the tribunal has made a decision. And the tribunal won't anymore be able to put your rent up even higher than the landlord is asking for. Previously, or currently, if your landlord is trying to increase your rent and a tribunal decides it's still below the open market value, they can tell the landlord they can go up even higher. They won't be able to do that anymore. It'll be whatever the landlord is asking for at most. And with the fact that you won't have to pay until the tribunal makes a decision, it's almost in your interest as a renter to try anyway. The more applications that go in, the longer it'll take to make a decision. There will be a fee, we believe. It's going to be, I think, £47. I'm not sure if that has been confirmed yet, so that might be wrong, but that's what I've heard. So you will have to factor that in if you're going to challenge a rent increase. Is it actually going to be worth it to pay that money up front? If, say, you're actually going to end up paying more over time because of how much the increase is going to be or not. So, but generally, if you think that you can afford the upfront cost of the tribunal and you'll make that money back, for example, by how long it'll take, then yeah, you definitely should take advantage of it. Like the tribunal system is there, but the risk, I suppose, is that if it's completely blocked up, they say we're not going to do this anymore, which again is why we think there should be rent controls, just a nice, straightforward, open system that everyone knows how much the rent is going to go, rather than having to go to courts and try different systems and wait a lot for the bureaucracy to get through it. We can just have a system where you know what your rent's going to be and the landlord knows what their income's going to be. Things that it's much more straightforward and much more transparent.
And is there a certain percentage by which rents would be capped per year? Obviously, you said that Acorn's looking at different models of rent controls, but how much, yeah, would rents be increase under that system?
Again, that's something that we're going to decide how much we feel is comfortable. But something, like I said, something tied to incomes is a good idea. So some sort of measurement of like the average income in the area that you're living in, inflation and things like that. Be taken into account. I don't want to commit myself right now to saying we think it should be 3%,
Hmm.
4%, 5%, or anything like that. But we know at the moment, most of the country, it's quite a lot, and then in Liverpool in particular it was around 10%, which is even more than that. And it took us, for example, a lot of campaigning and basically a rent strike in one estate to bring that down to sort of reasonable levels again. Again, that's the sort of thing that we don't really want to happen anymore. So yeah, whatever it is, it's got to be less than it is now.
Mm. And in terms of enforcement of the Renters' Rights Act, do you have any concerns about sort of a lack of resources in that area, or do you think that for example, councils and the courts will have capacity to be dealing with the issues that arise from enforcing it.
Yeah, it has been an issue in the past. Different councils are better than others, but often the councils have been reluctant or unable to enforce landlords properly. I'm happy to have seen literally just this morning that my council, Liverpool City Council, is looking to hire a few dozen more staff to their private rented sector team to help with enforcement of both the new act and the licensing scheme, the local licensing schemes, which course, we're a big fan of in ACORN too. We campaign a lot for them and would like to see that rolled out across the rest of the country too. But yeah, it is still basically a postcode lottery. Councils are cash strapped. They might not necessarily be able to afford it, and they might not be particularly willing to, depending on the political makeup in that council. And so that is one of the biggest challenges for the bill, really, for the act rather, is making sure that councils can enforce it and want to enforce it. Especially because the enforcement and the sort of the penalties for landlords who breach the laws are so much better now for tenants as well. So like again, like we really want to see it enforced properly so we can all feel the benefit of it.
Definitely. Um, so in terms of Acorn has also done quite a lot of campaigning around like retrofitting and making buildings better for people to live in. Do you, from your casework and campaigning, do you see that as a big issue in the rental market?
Yeah, it's a big issue. It's going to be a much bigger issue with what's going on in the world at the moment, unfortunately. Having more efficient houses would be quite a good thing for tenants to have at the moment, keep bills down. We have some of, if not the most inefficient houses in sort of Western Europe, and that's not just sort of economic and like a environmental, sorry, issue, a climate change issue. We have to pay to keep our houses warm in the winter and pay to keep them cool in the summer. So retrofitting is a really good thing. We're happy with how things are developing there with the energy efficiency standards for private housing being raised quite a lot. We're not thrilled how long it's going to take for that, but we are really happy that the cap for how much a landlord can spend is fairly high, £10,000, before your landlord is able to stop making it any more efficient. So most properties, I think, will be able to brought up to the standard of EPC Band C, which is pretty good. A lot of houses on the private market for sale, rather, aren't at that level, so that's pretty good. We are concerned that there may be unintended consequences for tenants with that, though. Rent evictions. So we really want to see when this comes in protections for tenants. Tenants should be able to be involved in this as well. Like it's going to be quite a lot of upheaval for some people, depending on their own situation or the situation of the property they're living in. They might need to be moved out for some time while the work is going on, for example. We don't want people being evicted by that or given huge rent increases because their property is much more valuable. So I think it needs to be done in a way that's really sort of sympathetic to tenants. And I'm really happy that ACORN is going to be involved, that we have already been speaking to the government about this. So we're hoping that's going to continue to be constructive and that as the policy gets developed and we get a bit closer to the deadline for it, it's going to be something that actually is really good for us.
Yeah, definitely. And is that something that you've heard from renters as a concern that they may be moved out, or just generally as a practical issue of carrying out retrofit? Sometimes that does have to happen, doesn't it?
Yes, we've had lots of discussions with our members when we were sort of developing our own positions on this, particularly sort of like disabled residents, elderly, some families as well, people who maybe don't speak English as a first language and may not fully understand what's going on. There's a lot of different communities and types of people who could be vulnerable about with this, and we've tried to speak to many of our members who fit into that as possible. And generally, a lot of people are just kind of scared of their landlord. For one reason or another, who might not respond to landlords or estate agents trying to contact them saying, hello, like we're trying to do this work to make your property better for you. They might just see those envelopes or those phone calls and just avoid and not want to engage, and we don't want that. So one of the things we're looking at again is like, how can we reach these people? How can maybe the government reach these people and say, like, this is a thing that is going to long term benefit you, and there's going to be these protections in place, you don't need to be afraid of it. But
Mm.
again, like that's something that we're still going to be speaking to the government as much as we can about on our members to make sure whatever we're suggesting is going to actually be good for our members and for the rest of the renters in the country.
And Acorn's also done a lot on short-term holiday lets. Obviously, that is a an increasingly big issue in lots of parts of the UK, the Lake District, Cornwall, and it's also become quite a big issue across Europe and big cities. Um, what do you think are the most important things in terms of short-term lets? Obviously, there is going to be a register for properties used for short-term holiday lets, but what else needs to happen, and how much does it do short-term holiday lets affect rental values in different areas?
It's very different in different areas. In Liverpool, a few years ago, it was quite a big problem. I'm happy that we brought in limits to how many houses can be turned into HMOs, and we have a HMO register. But a lot of councils don't. Like you say, it depends where you are in the country. Seaside resorts, cities, I know Wales as a whole has taken a lot of measures against it too. Yeah, it's potentially an issue with the Renters' Rights Act, landlords changing who they rent to. We've already seen there's a chance that there's a lot more student landlords only renting to students because there's different rules in the new act around having students and evicting students. So I think it is something that we're going to need to see in like things like secondary legislation and other sort of local legislations about HMOs and short-term lets to try and bring it down. We all know the problems they have for long-term residents, the strain they put on councils. So yeah, we definitely support measures to try and bring the number of those down and to make sure they're properly regulated and the councils are able to cope. We're not campaigning necessarily nationally directly about it too much, but yeah, locally, a lot of our branches are affected by it and have been trying to do a lot of work to try and bring it down and back under control. Even things like council tax doubling for empty homes and homes that are only used every now and then, things like that. So there's a lot of policies that can help. Again, like a lot of cities over the last couple of years have brought in double, triple, and quadruple, I think, council tax for homes that are being left empty, which again is really good. It was really good, I think, after one or two cities did it, and I know ACORN campaigned for it. I think it was in Leeds or Sheffield campaigned for it, and then after that, it quickly spread to most other cities. I think a lot of sort of the Labour councils in the cities all kind of followed the lead in that, which is really good to see. So yeah, a lot of things like that, pretty good, and we want to see a bit more of that.
You spoke about student housing. Is it that purpose-built student accommodation is not included in the Renters' Rights Act? That's my understanding. So it doesn't come under the same.
I believe you're right. Yeah, I believe a lot of purpose-built student housing is sort of exempt and a separate thing, but also student HMOs, they have their own eviction clauses in the act as well. So if it's a HMO being let out to students with, I believe it's three or more sort of separate students, um, landlords are able to use a special eviction power, which is designed to stop students basically squatting at the end of the academic year. But again, we don't think it's really fair. It was one thing we were hoping to have removed from the act. Unfortunately, we couldn't. There had to be some concession there. But yeah, often some of our campaigns, like with short-term lets and things, we often come up against like students and people saying, these student house conversions, they're really bad, and we have to try and be sort of sympathetic to the students. It's not their fault. We have student members who are great members. We do care. Anyone who's living in our cities and is a member is someone we're going to protect. We're not against students, of course, but students bring in a lot of money and culture to our cities. It's the landlords. And I think in the past, when we've had issues with student accommodations, we've had success like trying to tell the other residents that it's not really the students' fault. They're looking for a place to live like everyone else. It's landlords taking advantage. It's up to the councils to regulate it. So yeah, I don't want to sound like we're just against students and things like that. We did actually try and get rid of some of the weaknesses that students have in renting to try and bring them up to the same sort of standards everyone else is going to be able to enjoy.
Definitely. And do you think that there were any other areas of the Act when they were sort of when the Act was passing, well, the bill, sorry, was passing between the House of Commons and Lords that were watered down or you weren't as happy with?
Broadly, we were actually really happy with how it went. So we were able to get a lot of things in that we wanted. So one thing that our members raised after the initial publication of the bill was around issues around rent upfront and bidding wars, and we were able to get those in as amendments. The government were really actually keen to address that pretty quickly, which is really good. Um, there's still a few issues around things like guarantors. So the act is meant to be stopping discrimination against people who are on benefits or low incomes, going to finally be properly outlawed to say things like no DSS. But with requirements for guarantors still being there, there's still a potential risk of people being discriminated against. We're hoping for a little bit more on that as well. I don't know whether we could see maybe councils acting as guarantors. That's something we once tried to get through in Liverpool separately from the bill as a way of protecting people on benefits a few years ago. And um, yeah, we also wanted a few more protections around evictions too. So we were thinking maybe some sort of compensation for people who are being evicted as a way of stopping them becoming homeless and a way to disincentivize landlords a bit further from taking advantage of it. Because obviously, if you're being evicted, it can still be very hard, even with the limits on deposits and rents up front, to be able to afford to move. There's a lot of costs moving too, and we were hoping that if we could get like maybe a month of rent off when you're being evicted during the notice period, that might just be able to give you a bit more support and also like disincentivize landlords from just taking advantage of it. But unfortunately, that didn't get through, although we'll admit that was a bit of a long shot. So broadly, like the way it has gone through, we are pretty happy. We didn't really have to give up anything major through the entire thing, which we're pretty happy with.
Mm. And do you think those are issues that you'll continue to campaign on in terms of the eviction compensation as part of your sort of work going forward?
Potentially, yes. We're going to see how the Act works in practice, how it's implemented, how it's enforced, and see what loopholes come up. I'm sure there's things no one's thought of that we're going to have to campaign on too. But yeah, anything we wanted to see that we didn't get through, then of course, as long as we're able to keep campaigning for these things, we always want to see renters have more protections and are able to move and live a bit more freely with how they're able to like sort of enjoy their home or enjoy finding another home if they need to. Anything that we can do, we're going to keep campaigning for it.
I'm going to do a quick plug to anyone who has a burning question for Martin about renting and housing in general. Yeah, if you want to put it in the chat, that would be great. Um, I wanted to ask a bit about your thoughts on progressive policies in Europe that we could look at here in the UK. Um, Obviously, Vienna's has a social housing system that is pretty successful and houses approximately 60% of their population in sort of affordable municipal housing. And Amsterdam's got housing cooperatives. Um, what kind of ideas could we take and bring to the UK?
I'm sure there's lots. So, like I said, there's all sorts of different forms of rent controls. So, I think we should be looking at what works. I think Vienna is a very good example of a city where rent controls and social housing have worked brilliantly. And again, like we don't necessarily even need to look to Europe. We can just look at Britain's past from before the deregulation brought in by Thatcher. We had a very good housing system back then. Very few people rented privately. Social housing was massive. You could still afford to buy a house if that's what you wanted to as well. But yeah, looking at Europe, we've seen Spain recently as well, have bringing in controls of rent like freeze or rent suspension, I think actually, to help with the cost of living there while what's going on in the Middle East is going on. We could be doing so much more. I think, again, thinking back to what we talked about before about retrofitting as well. How is it that we've got houses that are so sort of inappropriate for the climate of our country? We've completely sort of dropped the ball on this, like as deregulation has just allowed things to just not keep up with the rest of Europe and the rest of the world in terms of like the sort of housing we're living in, the rights we have as renters, how we can afford to either rent or to buy. So I'm not going to say like this country has it perfectly or anything like that. But yeah, I think we should be looking at as both as ACORN and both as a country, sort of the government should be looking at what's working elsewhere. And yeah, people like places like Vienna, I think unambiguously I can go as far as to say that about Vienna. That's an example of something that works great, and that's what we should be trying to get back to. Or again, like look, Britain's past. That's again, we can have good social housing. We can have protected renters again. Like, we can have affordable homes again. It's not impossible.
Are there any examples in the UK that you think are good in terms of yeah, housing being built that is actually genuinely affordable in any cities in the UK?
I'm not too sure. I think generally places that have managed to hold on to their social housing generally quite better. Though I know there are still plenty of councils that treat their tenants pretty terribly because they see them as, well, they're council tenants, we don't really need to. But issues that we have with housing associations in cities like Liverpool, where we don't have any real social housing anymore, is they sort of hide behind this veneer of being a charity, of being not for profit, while it's treating their tenants pretty terribly. Or in fact, I've seen quite a lot of the sort of lower income uh, accommodation is really, really poor while operating really nice retirement homes. So it's almost as if they're like subsidizing the rich pensioners. And all those kind of things are avoided in cities that have proper social housing. I don't, through this, because I'm involved with ACORN so much, I see so many of the issues across the country. I can't really say any city has it right because there's just so many issues in like all of our branches that we're facing, and that does unfortunately include social housing as well. But we know broadly you are better protected, and that's what we want to get back to.
And are there any major campaigns you're working on this year? I know that you were like obviously heavily involved in stopping a rent hike in Liverpool and Welsh streets. But yeah, is there anything in particular?
Yeah, in Liverpool, we are looking at housing associations at the moment, with a focus on flooring. So an issue across the country is the housing association in England. Not Wales, fortunately, it's different. It's this policy is only in England. Um, Housing associations aren't required to put flooring down, except for the kitchen and bathroom. So often tenants are fined when they move out if they don't remove their carpets, and tenants often find just plain floorboards or concrete in their homes when they move in. And housing association tenants generally are the ones who can't afford to just put in new carpets. You might be able to get grants and things like that, but yeah, it shouldn't have to be such an effort. You should have a right to flooring. I don't think many private landlords would get very far if they're renting out properties with just wooden flooring and concrete. So why is it okay for housing associations? So we were successful in Cornwall doing this a few years ago in the southeast. To be able to get a housing association to change their policies, and surprise, surprise, actually turned out to be better economically for them as well as for the tenants. So we're hoping to do that in Liverpool. Nationally, I think you mentioned at the start, we're campaigning around council tax collections, bailiffs. Massive, massive issue in this country as council tax continues to rise is the use of bailiffs to intimidate and harass and often be violent or steal from vulnerable people. Councils, we don't believe, should be using bailiffs at all, or at the very least, it should be a last resort, and there should be much better regulation and enforcement around them. So we're trying to bring in across the country a lot better protections for people who are struggling to pay their bills.
Well, that's all of my questions. Thank you so much, Martin, for joining us. Yeah, it's been great having you and discussing the Renters' Rights Act and other issues around renting. We have just launched the LFF live session, so this is our second session. We will be doing future sessions with other campaigners, politicians, and progressive thinkers. So yeah, just keep an eye out, everyone, for future events from us.